The parking lot was a battlefield. The cold afternoon air bit through Jake's jacket as he pulled into the crowded shopping center, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. He wasn't here for a leisurely trip, just a quick stop at the pharmacy to pick up his prescription. His leg ached from the old injury that still hadn't fully healed, a dull throb that grew sharper the longer he moved. The handicap permit dangled from his rearview mirror, swaying slightly as he turned into the lane leading to the designated parking spots. And then, out of nowhere, the SUV swooped in. A sleek, black luxury vehicle cut in front of him with surgical precision, sliding into the handicap space he had been signaling for. The maneuver was so smooth, so audacious that for a second Jake just sat there, stunned. His foot hovered over the brake as his brain caught up with what had just happened. The driver's door opened and out stepped a woman, oblivious to the chaos she'd caused. She looked to be in her late 40s, dressed in an expensive coat with oversized sunglasses perched on her nose. She held a cup of coffee in one hand and a designer purse in the other, the kind of bag that cost more than Jake's monthly rent. Without so much as a glance in his direction, she clicked the door shut with her hip and started walking toward the entrance of the shopping center. Jake honked, a short, sharp burst. The woman, Karen as he instinctively labeled her, turned her head slightly but didn't stop. He rolled down his window. "Excuse me. That's a handicap spot. I was just about to park there." Karen finally turned to face him fully, lifting her sunglasses just enough to peer at him. Her eyes flicked to the handicap placard hanging from his mirror, then back to his face. A smirk curled the edge of her lips. "I'll only be a minute," she said, waving dismissively before turning away. Jake blinked, his frustration bubbling over. "That's not how this works. You don't have a permit." Karen let out an exaggerated sigh, turning back with all the dramatic exhaustion of someone being asked to do actual work. "Relax. It's not like you're in a wheelchair." The words hit like a slap. Jake clenched his jaw, feeling the heat rise in his chest. He'd had this argument before, more times than he cared to count. His injury wasn't as visible as some, but that didn't make it any less real. The long months of physical therapy, the surgeries, the pain, none of it mattered to people like her. "I have a legal right to this spot," he said, forcing his voice to stay even. Karen, already walking away again, just threw a hand over her shoulder. "Then sue me." Jake stared after her, stunned by the sheer arrogance. Around them, other shoppers bustled past, either too preoccupied to notice or too used to this kind of entitlement to care. The world kept moving, but Jake remained stuck in place, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. A horn blared behind him, snapping him out of it. Someone was waiting for him to move. His first instinct was to sit there, to refuse to budge until Karen came back out and was forced to acknowledge what she had done. But what would that accomplish? She didn't care. People like her never did. With a frustrated exhale, he shifted into drive and went in search of another spot. It took him nearly 10 minutes to find one, all the way at the far end of the lot. The walk to the entrance felt like a punishment. His leg burned with each step, but he forced himself forward, jaw tight, fists clenched. As he passed the front entrance, he spotted Karen inside, leisurely browsing a display of handbags. She wasn't in a hurry. She hadn't been just a minute. She had stolen that spot because she could, because she knew there were no immediate consequences. Jake turned away, swallowing his anger. He had more important things to do than waste energy on someone who clearly wasn't worth it. And yet, the injustice of it sat heavy in his chest. Somewhere in the back of his mind, an idea was already forming. Jake tried to let it go. He told himself it wasn't worth the energy, that people like Karen had been skating through life on entitlement for so long, they wouldn't even recognize fairness if it hit them in the face. But the irritation gnawed at him, burrowing deep. Every step he took inside the store, every sharp pang in his leg, was a reminder that he had been forced into extra pain because someone else decided they mattered more. By the time he picked up his prescription and made his way back toward the entrance, the simmering frustration had solidified into something sharper. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was waiting. Karen was still inside, wandering aimlessly through the aisles as if the world were hers alone to inconvenience. A small group of employees stood behind the counter, stealing wary glances at her, the kind of look that said they had dealt with her type before. Jake leaned against a pillar near the exit, watching. He didn't know what he was waiting for, not exactly. Maybe some small sign that the universe would right itself, that people like her didn't get away with things forever. And then she proved him wrong. An elderly woman struggled to maneuver her car into the handicap spot next to Karen's SUV, the only other designated space available. But Karen's parking job had been careless, her vehicle straddling the line just enough to make the neighboring spot nearly impossible to use. The old woman inched forward, then reversed, then inched forward again, trying desperately to make it work. Karen walked out of the store just in time to see it. She paused, coffee cup still in hand, then let out a loud laugh. "Maybe try a different lot, Grandma," she called out, her voice thick with amusement. Jake saw the woman freeze, hands tightening on the wheel. She didn't respond. Didn't roll down her window. Just put the car back into reverse and started backing out. Karen chuckled to herself and strode toward her SUV without a care in the world. Jake inhaled slowly, forcing the anger down, but it was different this time. It wasn't just about him anymore. He stepped forward. "Really?" he asked, loud enough for her to hear. "That was necessary?" Karen glanced up, her sunglasses back in place. "What?" Jake gestured toward the retreating car. "You couldn't even move your SUV over a little?" She clearly needed the spot. Karen scoffed. "Not my problem." His fists curled at his sides. "You know, you keep acting like you own the world, but you're just—" She cut him off with a dramatic sigh. "Oh my God, are you still whining about this? It's a parking spot. Get over it." Jake held her gaze. "You're the kind of person who thinks rules don't apply to them, aren't you?" Karen took a slow sip of her coffee, completely unbothered. "I'm the kind of person who doesn't let a nobody lecture me on how the world works." There was something chilling about the way she said it, so casual, so confident in the fact that there would be no consequences. Jake had spent enough time dealing with people like her to know that arguing was pointless. Entitlement wasn't something that could be reasoned with. It had to be dealt with. A plan started forming, quick and sharp, the kind that felt so obvious he was almost surprised he hadn't thought of it earlier. Karen smirked, clearly assuming she had won, and turned back toward her SUV. She reached for the driver's side door. Jake took out his phone and snapped a picture. The smirk faltered. "What the hell are you doing?" He held up the screen showing the photo, her car parked illegally in a handicap spot, no permit in sight. Karen let out an incredulous laugh. "Oh please. What are you gonna do, post about it?" "Go ahead. Nobody cares." Jake's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You're right. Nobody cares about social media." He turned the phone slightly. "But you know who does care? Mall security." The smirk disappeared. He didn't wait for her response. He just started walking. Jake didn't look back as he strode toward the mall entrance, phone in hand, heart pounding with something between anger and satisfaction. He had no idea if Karen was following him, and frankly, he didn't care. This wasn't about arguing anymore, it was about action. The security office wasn't hard to find. Tucked into a corner near the food court, it had the kind of bland corporate feel that made it easy to overlook. A bored-looking officer sat behind the desk, flipping through paperwork, barely glancing up as Jake stepped inside. "I need to report an illegally parked vehicle," Jake said, keeping his tone calm but firm. He held up his phone. "I've got pictures." That got the officer's attention. He leaned forward, squinting at the screen as Jake scrolled through the photos. Karen's SUV, the handicap spot, the missing permit. "Yeah, that's a violation," the officer muttered. He tapped a few keys on his computer, then reached for a radio. "We've got cameras on that lot too. Should be easy to confirm." Jake felt a flicker of vindication, but he kept it buried. This wasn't over yet. The officer spoke into his radio, relaying the details. Within moments, another voice crackled back, confirming they had eyes on the vehicle. The officer turned back to Jake. "We can have a tow truck here in 10 minutes. Jake nodded. "Perfect." He turned and walked out, feeling the weight of justice settle into place. Karen was standing near her SUV, arms crossed, watching him with narrowed eyes. "What did you do?" she demanded the second he got close. Jake didn't stop walking. "You'll find out." Karen scoffed, tossing her hair over one shoulder. "You're pathetic. You think getting mall security involved is going to—" She cut herself off as the tow truck pulled into the lot. Jake didn't need to see her face to know the exact moment she realized what was happening. The sharp intake of breath, the way her posture stiffened. It was all there. The tow truck came to a slow stop near her SUV. A uniformed driver stepped out, clipboard in hand, glancing between Jake and Karen. "This the vehicle?" he asked. Jake nodded, but it was the security officer, now stepping outside to oversee the situation, who answered. "Yep. No permit. Caught it on camera." Karen came to life. "Oh hell no." She marched toward the driver, putting herself between him and the SUV. "You can't tow my car. I was literally just inside for a second." The driver didn't blink. "You're in a handicap spot without a permit, ma'am. It's a violation. Karen turned, her eyes blazing as they locked onto Jake. You did this? You petty little? Jake shrugged. You told me to mind my own business. I did. Karen's face turned an ugly shade of red. This is harassment. I'll sue all of you. The security officer sighed, already looking bored. Ma'am, we have footage of you parking here, ignoring multiple warnings, and even admitting on camera that you didn't have a permit. You want to take this to court? Be my guest. Karen faltered, her mouth opening and closing. The tow truck driver moved past her, inspecting the SUV. Yep. It's getting towed. Karen let out a strangled noise of disbelief. You can't do this. The driver ignored her. The hooks went onto the tires. The gears groaned to life. Karen let out a scream of frustration, hands flying to her head. Are you kidding me? This is ridiculous. Jake watched in silence, arms crossed, letting it all unfold. The SUV's wheels lifted off the ground. Karen whirled on Jake one last time, seething. You're going to regret this. Jake met her glare without flinching. I doubt it. Karen stood frozen, her face twisted in fury as the tow truck's hydraulic lift groaned, hoisting her SUV higher. The reality of her situation was setting in, and for the first time since their encounter began, Jake saw it, the flicker of doubt, of panic, just beneath the surface of her carefully curated arrogance. People were watching now. A small crowd had gathered, phones in hand, some pretending to be busy while very obviously recording. It was the kind of scene that spread like wildfire online. A rich woman throwing a fit over the consequences of her own entitlement. Jake had no doubt this would be viral within the hour. Karen's hands balled into fists at her sides. This is illegal. This is harassment. I'll have all of you fired. The security officer, who had dealt with enough Karens in his time to know better than to take the threat seriously, merely exhaled through his nose. Ma'am, if you continue causing a disturbance, we'll have to call the police. Karen's mouth snapped shut. Jake could see her calculating, the gears turning as she tried to find a way to twist the situation in her favor. She glanced around, eyes darting from the tow truck driver to the security guard to the bystanders still watching, waiting for the inevitable explosion. And then, in a move so transparently desperate it was almost funny, she changed tactics. Her shoulders dropped, and her expression softened into something that might have passed for remorse if he didn't already know what kind of person she was. She turned toward Jake, eyes wide, voice suddenly small. Listen, she said, stepping closer. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot. I wasn't trying to be rude earlier, I was just in a hurry, you know? She gave a weak, performative laugh. I think we can work something out here. Jake didn't even blink. No, we can't. The false warmth evaporated in an instant, replaced by cold fury. You smug little. The tow truck's winch clanked loudly, cutting off whatever insult had been brewing. The SUV rocked slightly as the last of the restraints were secured. Karen let out a frustrated shriek, spinning toward the tow truck driver. Take it down. Now. The driver barely glanced at her. Tow yard's address is on this paperwork, he said, handing it to her with the same enthusiasm as a DMV worker who had seen it all before. You can pay the fine and pick it up there. Karen snatched the paper, crumpling it in her fist. This isn't over, she hissed under her breath. Jake smirked. Oh, I think it is. The truck started moving, rolling toward the lot's exit, dragging Karen's SUV behind it. She stood there, seething, watching her car disappear down the road. For the first time since the whole ordeal had started, Jake felt his muscles unclench. The ache in his leg was still there, but the weight of injustice, of knowing she was going to walk away without consequence, was gone. Karen turned on him one last time. She was breathing hard, her face red, her lips pressed together so tightly they were nearly white. He expected another outburst, another empty threat, but all she did was shake her head, nostrils flaring. Then she pulled out her phone and furiously tapped at the screen, probably trying to summon a rideshare. Jake chuckled under his breath. Guess you'll have to wait a few minutes? Should have parked legally. Her head snapped up, eyes burning with rage. But she had nothing left to say. She knew she had lost. Jake turned and walked away, the cold air sharper now but somehow lighter.